Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome. We are so glad you're here this evening to join us in our panel of school district leaders and school committee to talk a bit about something that I know is on everybody's mind, which is the latest news from the Mass School Building Authority that the Blackstone-Millville Regional School District was invited into their pipeline for the possibility of a new building. And I know that this has been a long time coming. There's been years of conversation, frankly, and years of work that have led up to this. And we're really thrilled to be with all of you tuning in at home this evening to not only share the work that's been done to date and to talk a bit about the implications of that, but also to hear about what's important to you and to really open up to a Q&A. And so, Tim, if you don't mind sharing our slide deck, we're going to take a few minutes this evening and walk our school district community through just a series of short slides that will really give kind of an overview and sense of a few key important questions. And if we move to the next slide, this is what we are looking to accomplish tonight. But before we delve into any of this, if we want to do a quick round of introductions, so all of our friends and family at home know who's on the line, that would be great. I'll start. I'm Jason DeFalco, the superintendent, very proud superintendent of BMR. Jill, do you want to go next?
I'm Jill Pilagalarani. I am the Director of Learner Support Services.
Scott?
I'm Scott Hebert. I'm Director of Facilities.
Aaron? You're muted, Aaron.
It's a great way to start. Erin Vanaco, Chair of the Blackstone-Millville School Committee.
And Tara.
Tara Larkin, a member of the school committee.
Awesome. So we're super pleased that everybody could be here this evening and take some time to discuss this really important conversation and topic with our community. And this is what we're going to look to really delve into tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about why we're here, how we got here, and the now what. And so as we're going through our conversation tonight, please do send your questions in. And Tim is actually fielding those, and we'll get those over to Jill. And when we open up the Q&A part, Jill will kind of run through the questions with everybody on the line tonight. And we'll do our absolute best to answer those. But I do want to preface tonight's conversation with, we're not necessarily experts in this space yet. And so we will do our best to answer all of your questions, and those that we can't get to, we will do our best to get answers to and get them back out to you. We'll have our PowerPoint from tonight on our website. And I'm also going to share it with our school community and the update this Friday. And so with that, Tim, if you want to scoot to the next slide. All of our work in our district anchors back to our district improvement strategy. And so I know that to our family and friends that have been tuning in, whether it is our school district goals, whether it's our budget, which we're going to present Thursday at school committee, at least the first draft. There'll be much work to do still. Or whether it's this and talking about our facilities needs and our facilities work, everything comes back to our focus on creating a school district where everyone is welcome and belongs, and meeting the mission and the core values of our system. We're really excited to be able to talk about this tonight, but particularly through the angle of facilities. And this is a big piece of our why. Moving along, we're going to just do a quick run through of our process. And it started all the way back with our capital study, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just to kind of refresh everybody, it started back with our capital study in 2019, 2020, when we initially polled parents, students, staff, and did a very thorough and deep facilities review. Our school community might remember Greg. I'm sure you remember his face if you saw him from DRA. And he worked very hard along with our school committee and school community to really evaluate and assess where our facilities are. From there, Tara chaired for us our capital planning committee, who actually shepherded through the really good work that led to our statement of interest being submitted last April. As you can see, the capital planning committee worked, actually was a bit over a year to get us to the place where our statement of interest was approved and ready to be submitted last April. Our school community, I'm sure, recalls the multiple updates in September of this school year about the Mass School Building Authority coming out to the district to do something called a senior study. And they had an opportunity to meet with Aaron Vanaco and Scott and Jill and myself and Jill Fowlis and others, members of our Board of Selectmen, the chairman from Blackstone and the chairman from Millville, to really get to know a little bit more about our statement of interest, to get to know a little bit more about what we were looking to do, and frankly, to see the facility, to see the high school itself, which I think was very powerful, seeing as though we were one of 10 schools that were selected for a project out of 58 applications. MSBA, as you can imagine, does not ask twice if we are interested. So the fact that we actually got into this pipeline is really quite significant, and have an opportunity to receive a major grant, which I know Tara will talk about a little bit later on. Her and Aaron will delve into the specifics of that. But where we are now that we've been accepted in, is, and if you look at the last bullet point underneath the MSBA modules, you will see there are kind of a series of next steps, and the underlined and bolded one called eligibility is where we are now. And I'm going to explain that at a deeper level in just a minute. But you can see that following the eligibility period, there is something called a project team phase or module, a feasibility module, schematic design, project scope, design, development, construction, and project closeout. This whole process, in some cases, can take up to 6 to 7 years. So I just want to really underscore that, because this is not a speedy process by any means. And right now, we are at that first stage called the eligibility phase. So Tim, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, this will give our school community a sense of what happens during the eligibility period. And I'm not going to read all of these 6 steps to you, but if you look at the first purple text at the beginning, you will see that it is in fact a 270-day period. And so that is a lengthy period in itself that will lead us to looking at step 5, what we hope will be a special fall town meeting, where we will have a feasibility study, we hope, on a special ballot for the towns to consider. And so you can see there's a series of steps that lead up to that meeting, and that there are many days between now and then for us to have multiple conversations with our school community about a feasibility study, what that entails, and frankly, what the next steps are after that. So looking at how we got here, Aaron's going to talk a little bit about some of the work on the next slide with our capital improvement projections. Tim, if you want to move that forward, that would be great.
Thank you. So as Jason mentioned earlier in the timeline, this has been several years of work to get to this point. We contracted with DRA to do a lot of the inside work for us, and really get into our buildings and our community to see what issues we do have in our current facilities. They gave us a very detailed report that, I mean, we'd definitely be happy to share to anyone that wants to see it. It's been a topic between us and our towns for several years through this whole process. That book has been out there. But basically what we need to focus on here looking at the cost of what a project would be is looking at this report from DRA and the work that we would need to do to maintain our current facility if we were not accepted into MSBA pipeline. The identified issues from within the last 2 years, so there's probably more now, are upwards of $50 million. So DRA gave us a very detailed outlook on that, and and in the years that we should be looking at what parts of the buildings would need attention versus the cost. And another reason we did this was to give our towns 5-year capital plans, which if you see the spread here from 21 to 25, it's upwards of $25 million. So that was very daunting to see, but I think it definitely led us in the right direction of comparing this to, are we really going to start piecemealing and putting these pieces together, spending millions of dollars of our taxpayer dollars for an outcome of in the future still needing a facility? So it really helps put things into perspective for us. The numbers are scary, but the numbers are real. And upwards of $50 million to maintain the facility versus spending money on a project where we would have a beautiful new facility for years and years, generations to come through that building, just as we've all been able to. I think that outweighs the number personally. But as you can see on this chart, it's expensive, but it's a need. So I'm glad we have this information to help identify, and be able to give the comparisons. I think the next slide would show here we go. And Tara's going to help explain this one too. But this would show, spending it on repairs, spending it on new facility, same cost, better outcome, or better facility. But Tara, do you want to add to that?
Sure. So like Erin, you just said, we're going to be spending around 50 million regardless to get all of these repairs and bring our buildings up to code. So basically for the same cost, if we use this grant, we're going to get double, because currently MSBA is reimbursing at around 55%. So shown in purple, if you look at the 120 million, that is the estimate in current dollars of what the project would be to have the new building. And with the 55% grant, MSBA is going to pick up 66,000 of that, leaving the towns with 54 million, which I guess I missed a few zeros, sorry, on this sheet. Yeah, so for the same money, we would get so much more. We're getting the new facilities, we're getting updated spaces, better environment. And I mean, it just seems to make a lot of sense. So hopefully everyone understands and sees that.
Yeah, better environment, better, the facility would be completely up to code for everything we need, from fire and safety standards to accessibility. We don't have that now. And I'm almost embarrassed to say that in 2023 that we don't have that. So this grant is a gift. It's almost a $60 million gift if these numbers, are what we'd be looking at.
And Erin, I appreciate the way you and Tara kind of frame this, because the scenario that is here is looking at square footage of about 159 square feet. That was based on the square footage needed for grades 6 through 12. And that's assuming that the current rate of $750 a square foot is what the going amount is for construction. We know how kind of variable things are right now. The initial projections were between 615 and 650 a square foot. But we know as of late with inflation, with inflation, the cost of labor, that those costs have gone up. But by the time we're looking to build, we're looking at a couple of years, a few years out from now. So those numbers, hopefully will go down. They could, of course, go up. We don't know. But I appreciate Aaron and Tara putting this together because it gives a good example of what a scenario could be. And remember, a lot of this is fleshed out in that feasibility study where essentially a team is brought in to do a full analysis of what configurations are kind of best fit, if you will, for the school district. And so while this is certainly helpful looking at this particular scenario, which is a 6 through 12 building, that may or may not be what ultimately is presented from the feasibility study. If we're looking at a grades 9 through 12, that square footage would of course be less, right? If we're looking at a 7 through 12, it would be more than the 9 through 12, but it would be less than what's presented here. So it all depends on what that configuration looks like. The other piece that's important to mention, if you look at the second bullet that's titled Hartnett lower level only, that is referring to the idea of turning the current Hartnett building into a grades preschool through 5. You'll notice there are some renovation costs there that are about 6.8 million, again, estimate. That is not eligible for reimbursement through MSBA. And that is essentially to outfit the lower level to be able to accommodate our youngest learners, our preschool and kindergartners who need bathrooms in the classroom. And believe it or not, smaller, lower toilets, those little ones can't climb up, but we would actually have to put in, from a regulatory perspective, different bathrooms with different access. So again, I just want to underscore the fact that this is just a scenario. After the feasibility study, assuming we get through that phase and the towns approve that, it may be that this scenario is not recommended. They may recommend keeping 3 buildings in the district. So we don't know that yet. The other piece that's important to note that Tara captured here is that the maximum project cost return to MSBA. So you see a series of projects listed here. And believe it or not, those are actually good to see because it means that the district and the towns have been very intentional about going after additional grant opportunities. Sorry, my lights are on a sensor. Additional grant opportunities for other projects in the district, like roofs, windows, boilers, doors. And MSBA has, because we've been very aggressive in going after those, and the towns have been very supportive in us acquiring those, there could be potential cost returns that we need to do with MSBA. But honestly, all of that can be negotiated through a new construction project. And so they're referred to something called a clawback, which essentially is these are grants that we received, and there could be a clawback on these depending on what the ultimate project looks like that we end up building. Again, whether it's a 6 through 12, a 7 through 12, a 9 through 12, whether we keep 2 buildings, 3 buildings, whatever that configuration looks like, could impact the maximum cost return to MSBA. But all of that is negotiated through the project itself. So I don't want people to necessarily see these numbers and panic and think we're writing a huge check to pay all these things back. Not necessarily the case. Of course, could be, depending on what that configuration looks like, but it is way too early in the process to really know. Erin and Tara, is there anything else on this, or Scott or Jill, anything you wanted to add before we move? This is a really important one.
I just want to add that, especially this page, I think this gives us, I don't want to say worst case spending. I know you touched on, the reimbursement based on inflation. But I was able to attend that MSBA meeting where we were voted into the pipeline, and I really appreciated the attention that they're giving to inflation and the time, the way they're spreading this out. Unfortunately, it does show that they only accepted 10 of us in, that they are paying attention to that. So I don't think anyone should see these numbers and panic and say, oh, it's going to be so much more than that. I think this is a great snapshot of planning for the most we would possibly be looking at, and including the other projects that we had out there with MSBA. So it shouldn't be sticker shock later on. This would be the shock, in my opinion.
Anything else before we shift? Okay, Tim, if you can move us to the next slide. The next series of slides I think are really important because there are three main points that anchor us in, again, kind of the why we're here and the how, not necessarily the process, but the actual experience that our students are having at the high school on a regular basis versus the experience that we want them to have. And we all know that the people, kind of make the building, so to speak. But at the end of the day, we have to have a building that meets the educational needs. And frankly, we'll hear from Scott in a few minutes, the actual systems needs, and I don't mean school system, I mean systems themselves, like boilers, et cetera. And there are some significant accessibility issues that Jill is going to talk a little bit about. But before we delve into that, the headline around this is essentially, and you can see it all listed out here, but the high school has just outlived its use as far as 21st century education is concerned. And if you don't, if you don't subscribe to that notion, we are going to give you an opportunity. We're going to open the building up, not when children are in, of course, but for tours. We want you to see our science labs. There are certain spaces we want you to see: our locker rooms, our fitness spaces, our classrooms. It is incredibly challenging to meet their current day standards, the instructional standards, the things that kids have to learn and the type of learning that they do, versus what we were all exposed to in school, which was a lot of direct instruction, teachers at the chalkboard, you're in rows, you have your textbook open, no one speaks unless called on. Those days are long gone, my friends. And so, and such is that the same in the workplace, right? So the idea of us preparing our students for college and career, we need to ensure that we are creating the learning environment and the lab space and the learning space for us to be able to have our biomed pathway, our computer science pathway that we're looking to do, and our engineering pathways. And that's just one piece. That doesn't speak to the actual core instructional classes, English, math, science, social studies themselves, or our athletics and our band programs. I think the high school is a tremendous building. It looks beautiful on the outside. Huge shout out to our custodial staff, Scott, your team that maintains that space. It is beautiful, it is clean, but it is woefully inadequate for the academic side of the work, which is what we're about. It is woefully inadequate for the band, for the athletics, for those extracurriculars that really help make the school what it is. And so again, toward the end of our conversation tonight, we'll have an opportunity to talk about next steps, but one of those important next steps is to actually get our community into the space itself to see it. Because when you see it and you see those labs and you see those locker rooms and you see those classrooms, it is abundantly clear that we can do better for our kids. Jill, do you want to talk a little bit about the accessibility? Because there is a whole legal piece to this as far as special education.
Yep, sure. So accessibility, we've heard that a few times here.
And if you can move the slide, please.
Oh,
sorry, Jill.
That's okay. There we go. So accessibility, we've heard that a few times. And, as a district, we continue to focus our efforts on accessibility because we want to ensure that that our students have access, but also our families and our community. So there have been things that we've been able to accommodate through the years to allow that. And for example, you see some examples that we have here. In closing our outdoor walkways, we do have outdoor walkways, and the only way that some of our students and families can access other parts of our building are by going outside. And that's in all types of every season, all types of weather. We could have students who are, have crutches. We can have students who have some mobility issues. They could be in a wheelchair. And in order to get over to that side of the building, they do have to go outside. So we did our best to accommodate. We may have an enclosed, a temporary kind of tarp-like enclosed walkway. Our equipment and furniture, we continue to access. We make sure that our students have, it could be desks that are appropriate for their size, for their height, for their mobility needs. We're doing all of those things. Our bathroom updates, it may sound simple, but it's not as simple as just being able to get in and out of the bathroom. We have, because the building has been built quite some time ago, we need to install additional grab bars. We sometimes need to accommodate students using other types of bathrooms, larger bathrooms. It could be faculty bathrooms, a nurse's bathroom. And we've actually gone as far to make sure our students have not only access, but privacy. We did build another bathroom at our high school just to allow for that. We've also made sure that our classroom spaces for our students with disabilities, whether it's a class they're attending or services, that our classroom sizes are equitable. And also, things like air conditioners and humidifiers. We may have some students that have some health and medical related needs, so they have to have that temperature control within the classroom. So we're able to accommodate, a lot of these things. But what we're not able to do is really modify some of the areas that, we need to address for, again, our students, our families, and our community. And when we talk about that access, we want to make sure that the barriers that we have, we need to address, because it's not just about just access, it's more about natural access and more independent access. So for example, we have doorways in some of our buildings that, yes, with some assistance, individuals who may be in a wheelchair may be able to get through there, but they're not able to do it naturally or with independence. Our elevator at the high school, it is kind of a small confined place. And not only is it small for an individual to get on there with another adult, but it also does not provide access to all different areas in the building. We have locker rooms. We have additional PE spaces that some of our students can't access. So although we may have an elevator, its size, and it really doesn't get to all the places that it needs to go. Again, I talked about locker rooms, physical spaces, and also our buildings and grounds. If you've ever been on our track, the incline going up to the track could be difficult for, people who have some mobility issues, but also maybe in a chair. So right now we are doing our best to accommodate as much as we can, but we're really not able to make those modifications to allow our students, our community, and our families to naturally access everything we have to offer here at BMR, and to do it with more independence. So this really is a big and part of us. And again, it's not just what happens on the inside of school, it's looking at our building as a community building. And it really is limiting in the amount of access people, can have, and doing that kind of naturally and independently as all the rest of our, of others can do.
Jill, can I just add to something you said? Because I think it's really important, particularly you mentioned building and grounds. Just this fall alone, I have heard from 3 families who couldn't get the grandparents of our athletes up onto the field to watch the games, football games, field hockey games, soccer games, because of the accessibility issue and wheelchair piece that you're talking about. But we also had a visiting team whose head football coach is in a wheelchair and was not able to coach to the degree that he is used to, because he had an incredibly difficult time getting on our track to get up on the field. So this is a very real issue that is, and Aaron, I know that you said it earlier and framed it very well. Like it's like concerning that we have to talk about this stuff in 2023, but this is still where we are. Our building was opened in 1969. It's 54 years old. And it needs a lot of work, right? When we think about when the building was open versus now, how much of these things were really a focus? How much of a focus was it to create a school district or school where everyone is welcome and everyone belongs. Probably wasn't the mantra at the time when the building was constructed. It was probably a different focus, right? So I think it's important to just note that, that these are very real issues that go beyond students and into the community. Scott, do you want to talk a bit about systems?
Sure.
And Tim, if you can move the slide, please.
So, as you know, many of our buildings are aging, and each one possesses unique challenges. We'll speak mostly of the high school, of course. Air conditioning, there's lack of air conditioning. There is no air conditioning. Jill had touched on this. Our special needs students need air conditioning, controlled environments, and it's just hard to do. People drive by and they think we're leaving the windows open in the wintertime, but it's actually, we have air conditioning units in there to maintain the humidity and whatnot. We're certainly not leaving our windows open by any means. They're insulated. The HV boilers in the high school are the original ones. We did convert them to gas a few years ago, but they're still inefficient. Again, we welcome you to come to the tours and see these boilers. Each classroom has an air handler in them that are the original air handlers. Some of them, the outside dampers aren't working. We froze a heater coil last weekend because the outside damper never closed and the coil burst and we had water leaking throughout the building. Fortunately, it was the first floor and it didn't seep with the ceilings. It was an easy cleanup, very little damage. And we were able to isolate it. And we could only isolate it because this particular coil froze a couple of years back and industrial boiler, who services our boilers, was put in new valves. So we could shut the valves right off and isolate that one unit. Otherwise, we'd have to drain down the whole entire system and repressurize it. And when you repressurize it, you could cause more leaks by overpressurizing it. So it's just, you cannot access these valves. Mechanical and electrical, again, at the high school, I don't know how many of you know this, but we have sprayed on fireproofing on the first floor ceilings up above the ceiling tiles. Therefore, we can't access the ceiling tiles to make any repairs up there without calling in Universal Environmental Control, which is our asbestos consultant, and they have to come in with special machines and clean the air and make sure that it's safe for the children to come back in. Last winter, we had one of our heater units overheated and melted the electrical system inside, causing smoke. We had the fire department come in and they literally busted down ceiling tiles in 3 of our classrooms. We had to shut down the whole entire lower B wing and have that, again, Universal Environmental Control come in and clean up the mess and do all kinds of air quality tests, make sure it was safe for our students to return. That was a 3-day process where students lost learning because we had to move them around and get them into different parts of the building. I shouldn't say they lost learning. We were able to accommodate them, but it was an inconvenience. Again, if any plumbing breaks up there, we have to isolate the whole wing again. If you come in, we did put in a new smoke detector system in the high school. And if you go in, you're going to see conduit, electrical conduit, running down the walls because we couldn't access the ceilings. Again, because of the asbestos. Our windows, all of the windows at the high school are single pane windows. They're all original. They serve their purpose, but as everybody knows, they're not efficient. Lack of building control systems. We touched on the educational needs and the need to upgrade our electrical system in the high school is a challenge. It can't be done. Therefore, it's a challenge to get the latest technology in there. Again, we have to run conduit down the walls or up on the first floor or second floor, I should say. Security can be a challenge. We did install vestibules, what we call man traps. But again, because of the way the building is laid out, it's just, there's a lot of dead space. There's a lot of places that just are wasted, and they're just, it's not, can't really say it's not secure. The building is secure, but it's a challenge. And of course, the repairs to the existing systems are very costly. Again, each classroom, the unit ventilators would all have to be replaced, along with the boiler system. And that's just at the high school. Now, JFK, we did put new boilers, we put the new windows. But again, the air handler units in the classrooms are not up to par. It's very hard to control the heating in the classrooms.
And Scott, can I add to something on that? Because I think I think this last point that you're discussing, I know as superintendent of our district, is the one that makes me incredibly uneasy when something breaks, because there's no certainty that we can fix it. I'm sure our community members last year, we had to close the high school. They actually went to school a day longer last school year than everybody else because we had an issue getting the gas in from outside to the boilers. We had a similar issue over break. Thankfully, there were no kids in the building. There were staff in the building, and it was very cold, if you remember. But we were able to get things fired back up and running, but it took about a week to get things moving. I'm sure the holidays impact that, of course, but I was very grateful that that wasn't during, school being in session, because I don't know what that impact would have been. And it's a bit of a wild card if we're able to get the parts that we need to replace or repair what's broken, because everything's original to the building. And a lot of those parts, they just don't make them anymore because it was, the late 60s when the building opened, and in late, mid to late 60s when it was constructed. So I just think that's an important thing to mention, that it's from a timeliness perspective, guaranteeing these repairs are done in a quick way to keep the building open is not always possible.
Right.
And that's where you carry.
And I'm sure that anybody that has attended the town meetings, the auditorium, you go in there and there's no AC. I mean, it's just those meetings can be brutal. We got to open the doors and run fans and stuff. And I mean, it'd be great to have central AC in there again. And that would be updated with the new building, possibly. I'm sure Jason's going to touch on this later on as to, what the feasibility study is going to tell us we should do with that building.
That's a perfect segue, Scott. If everyone's okay, we can move to the next slide and delve into that a little bit. And for those who have been really kind of plugged into this work over the past couple of years, certainly apologize if any of this is redundant. I think we've got people coming into this from multiple places, so it's important that we try to keep everybody kind of anchored in the same information. So thank you for engaging in this if this is stuff you have seen or heard before. But when we look at the work of the Capital Planning Committee that Tara led, a lot of that work was around looking at the different configurations of what we could do. When you submit a project to the Massachusetts School Building Authority, you can't just say we need a project done, come in and help us figure it out. Like that, then you won't get accepted into the pipeline. You have to actually do your homework, which is why it took us about 1.5 years to get our statement of interest done, because this capital planning work needed to be done first. Because as a capital planning committee, which was comprised of members from our FinCom, our Board of Selectmen, our school committee, of course, administration, we had some parents that were on the committee. We had to go through all of this work to figure out what is it we actually want to submit to the MSBA for. Scott mentioned in the prior slide, the windows the boilers, and you might be listening to this thinking, well, just replace those, right? The shell of the building is okay. The shell of the building actually is not okay. The fact that the envelope itself of the building is leaking and crumbling is actually one of the things that got us into this pipeline for this year. It actually is the envelope. To the common eye, you don't notice that on the outside because it's very well kept. But there are major envelope issues. The other piece that's important to note is the MSBA will make a decision based on the age of the equipment if they're actually willing to even replace it. And at this stage, they are not doing any accelerated repair projects. They're not doing any roofs, windows, boilers, doors. They're doing none of that right now, and not for the foreseeable future. So if you're wondering, well, you know, the building looks fine, it is fine. It's not. There are major envelope problems with the building. And if you're wondering, why not just replace the windows, boilers, and the doors? We can't. We actually can't. MSBA would be very unlikely to approve those projects with the envelope situation and the particularly it's on the inside of the building where you notice it and the leaking, but they're actually not even funding those projects anyways. So the fact that we are in this pipeline right now is really quite significant for our community. So when we were going through this process with the Capital Planning Committee, we needed to look at a lot of different configurations. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on walking through all of these, but what you see on slide 11 are actually all of the configurations we looked at. We talked about keeping the 4 buildings in place, which is what we have now. We looked at a 3-building alignment with various grade levels at various places. And then we looked at a 2-building alignment. And where we landed for the statement of interest, and I want to just stress this, it may not be what the feasibility study says we should actually do. We landed on the 2-building alignment model, which was 2A, which was a pre-K through grade 5 at the current middle school in a new or renovated high school configuration that looks at a 6 through 12 or 6 through 13 because we have 18 to 22 programming, year-old programming at the high school. But if you're wondering like, well, did you consider this? Did you consider using the complex for a new high school? Or did you consider moving the high school to the middle school? Poor Tara, we spent, she had to facilitate these conversations. We spent hours upon hours processing all of those, looking at the actual square footage, what we would need, what we have, what would need to be built out. We looked at everything from the building systems and structures to the septic, you name it. We looked at every possible configuration. And the best fit for our statement of interest, it may not be what feasibility shows, but the best fit. And again, for those of you that were plugged in and paying attention and really in tune with this all through this process, you know this already, but was that 2A, which was the PK through 5, grade 6 through 13. Can you move the slide, Tim? Because this actually looks at the specifics of what I just mentioned. And the 4 kind of bullet points below references really the why. But again, I want to underscore that this may not be what the final product is. This may not be what the final product is. It might be something else that comes out of our feasibility study. But we had to present the best model we could come up with to the MSBA in our statement of interest. So this is what we presented, but know that that could change as a result. And so before we go to the next steps, Tim, can you just go back very quickly? I want to just kind of underscore a couple of things on slide, I think it's slide 5, which is the eligibility period. It's slide 5 of where we are now. Because I know that it's really important for our school community to get a good sense of that. And I didn't read through these things, but this is essentially the stage where we are now. So this certification of the district's understanding of the grant program rules, et cetera, we're working through that, forming a school building committee, which I know the school committee will be tasked with doing. You'll hear more about that. Summarizing our existing maintenance practices. We're in the process of that. The certification of design enrollment for the proposed project. We'll be working with MSBA on that. One of the pieces that really accelerated this for us also, and for those that were really plugged into the school reconfiguration work that we decided to kind of put on pause for right now was the fact that our enrollment is just under 1,500. We are pretty close to where we projected we would be in the next 10 years. We're just about there. We're about 1,468 students. And that's important for our community to really get their arms around because, you know, we have a district that was designed and built for 3,200 kids. And for a multitude of reasons, you know, the enrollment is at about 1,470. So we'll have to work on certifying that enrollment. Of course, we will need authorization to move forward and put a ballot question together to get it in front of the towns. The towns will vote twice in this process. The first vote will be a feasibility study. That will determine whether or not we're even allowed to move forward and commission a team to come up with the best scenario, best fit for the district in terms of square footage, grade configurations, and really accelerating the district into our next phase of work. That is all done in feasibility. And so that will be the first vote that the community needs to take. We're hoping sometime late fall, early winter. If it's a yes vote, then we move into that next phase of the project, which is we're putting the team together and we're starting to really do the analysis of what makes the most sense for our two towns and our school community. And I don't know if Tara, Erin, Scott, Jill, I don't know if anybody wants to elaborate on that, but I thought it would be important to kind of come back to that as one of our final points. I know this is a big piece because it's where we are. We're okay. You're muted, Scott.
I think you touched on it, Jason, with the student enrollment. I mean, if we can offer them a new building with modern technology, get them to want to stay in our district instead of move on to, you know, school choice, and I think that's huge.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Scott, one of the things to those that may not have plugged into this during a school committee meeting that's really important to note, we do have school choice kids out. We have school choice kids that come in. But last year, we lost 170 families. They moved out of our towns. They actually moved. They either didn't renew their leases or they sold their homes. That's important. That's really important to note. And I think that there's a relationship there between the towns and the schools where we really need one another hand in glove. When we look at the commerce that the two towns have, and we look what they offer on that side of things, and we look at the schools have to offer, good schools, great schools make great communities, and great communities make great schools. And so there is really this kind of hand in glove relationship. And I think, Scott, that's kind of what you're talking about there.
Yeah. And also, I want to emphasize that, like you touched on also, drive by the building. It looks beautiful from the outside. Beautiful grounds, beautiful building. Please come in, take a tour. See our boiler room, see our locker room, see our labs, see the kitchen.
And that's a great segue. So Tim, if you want to move to our last slide, which is our next steps, exactly what Scott's talking about. Ooh, go ahead.
While Tim's moving that slide, based on what Scott just said, and what Scott, you know, focused on his slide, MSBA took an extra step in this process for the statement of interest, which is why we were delayed until December on an acceptance. But they did a senior study. They came out, they saw our facility, they spent hours with us, they walked the facility, they walked the grounds, they took photos and videos. That is why we are here today. They've already seen it, they've documented it. Definitely, we want the community to come out. I think, you know, along with what Jason mentioned, we're going to need a school building committee. I think we're going to, you know, start with other things too, like alumni come back to school day. You come out and see that it is exactly the same. Your science lab is exactly, if you etched anything in that table, it is still there. So I think we're going to have to get creative with that. And I think it'll do two things. It will get people very excited about it, and it will show the need. You know, because this is, it is going to be the center of our communities, from the inside out. You know, new facility, new grounds, new atmosphere, and even renewed new, you know, school spirit. So it you know, we can make this as exciting as we want to, and as much as we want it to be for those little ones right now. You know, we need the preschool mom and dads and the kindergartners and the first graders. Your kids are going to benefit from this, not the kids that are in the high school right now. You know, hopefully they'll come back and vote for it, because they're living it right now, but they'll be of voting age by the time we are in that stage. So it is a process, and I just, like I said, I wanted to tie that back into what Scott just said. Come out and see it, because MSBA did, and they said, you need this.
That's a great point, Erin. And so these are some of the things we're looking to do next. We want to hear from communities that have recently gone through this. We want to see new constructed schools. We're going to look to organize some trips. We're going to get some buses. We're going to take community members out and let them see what some of the new construction looks like, and let someone try to convince me that our kids don't deserve that. Good luck. We're going to learn about the financing and hear a bit about communities do this all the time. We're not the first ones. We won't be the last. And so what does that financing look like on the final end of the project when it's all said and done, and how does that work? Again, tour the facility and have lots more conversations like this. I think we have about 28 people tuning in. Please tell your friends to tell their friends. This is a huge community piece. This is not a school district piece. This is a community piece. And Erin, I really love the way you said that this is the center of our community, of our towns, and it will be for decades to come. And I won't be convinced that a 54-year-old building where we have no likelihood of replacing any of the systems or structures within it with a crumbling envelope and asbestos issues is the best for our kids. You'll never convince me of that. And so, you know, come out and see it. We're going to talk a lot about it. Talk to your family and friends about this conversation. Share the video link when it's up. We need more than 28 people plugged into this.
Definitely.
Jill, do you have any questions from the viewers?
We do. Tim sent along a few questions. Hold on one second. It was said to maintain, it would be around 50 million, and with the grant, it would with the grant to build would be around 55 million. Does this cost include maintenance and updating to the other buildings, or would that be more?
So the $40 to $50 million estimate was the total upgrades and maintenance to all of the buildings. However, the majority of that, the bulk of that, is the high school. And so if you're looking at the overall cost to just maintain what we have, that's what it is, the majority going to the high school. But remember, those are 2020 dollars. Those estimates were done in 2020. Those are not up to date.
Well, and also let's remember that with a feasibility study and what we were already getting into the weeds of was reducing our buildings. So the 50 million includes building repairs to buildings that we may not need to use anymore. So putting it into a new facility, you know, it would even itself out.
The next question is, if the cost of the project including the outdoor accessibility, or will this be an additional cost?
You're referring
I'll start with saying this is a whole package. Yeah. You know, we are not putting a 21st century building without, you know, it's going to be something you come around the corner and are wowed by from outside in. So yes, there are many other grants that we can go after, though MSBA, there are very strict guidelines to what they do reimburse for. We're not going to, do just the minimum. This is going to be a fully encompassed package for building and campus, and other grants will have to come into play to cover other parts of it. But I am willing to say it absolutely includes outdoor accessibility.
And I'll just touch on that a little bit, Erin, too. Again, like we said earlier, the track, the baseball fields, the soccer field, they're not ADA compliant. We have to bring them up to ADA standards. So I would see.
And MSBA does cover ADA projects, so.
Grandparents should be able to see their grandkids play, whether it's in the marching band up on the field, or whether it's field hockey, or whether it's a baseball game, or there should, you should be able to get people to those fields.
The next question goes back to a little bit about enrollment. I know that was talked about and where we are right now, but the question is, as we know, enrollment goes through an ebb and flow in size. How will you handle the population when it increases again?
That is a great problem that I hope we have. I can say to you, if you look at the past 10 years, it is not ebbed and flowed. It is just, I don't know, ebbed. I don't know what is the, if you, and you can go to our webpage, the Department of Education has a district profile page. So if you're in Google, you can actually Google DOE profiles and it'll pop up. You just click on Worcester County and then you click Blackstone-Millville. You can go to the student tab and you can look at our population and literally just click back every year. It hasn't ebbed and flowed. It has been consistently decreasing. And part of that is what we learned from our enrollment study is the empty nester thing, where kids are going off to college. They're not necessarily coming back to town. New families aren't necessarily moving in. So you have this kind of steady decline of population in the two communities.
I think it's important to touch on too, Jason, that when the MSBA came out and toured the Hotnet Middle School, they asked, how did this get built? There's just too much space here. There was no need for this building. 25 years ago, the town thought they were going to have this big boom, and it never came. Enrollment never went up that high as they anticipated.
We do have a couple more questions. The next one was, what will happen to the buildings that we no longer need?
That's a good question. So it would depend on the building itself, right? So the middle school and high school currently are owned by the district. The elementary schools are owned by the towns. So if it's an elementary school, we would collaborate with the town, whichever town it is, and really work with them to come up with a timeline that would make sense for us to essentially turn the building back over to the community. But I would also add to that, Jill, that we have been working very closely with Bi-County Collaborative, our special education collaborative. And as you know, they came out to look at the space, JFK, to see if they had some usable space, and they're very excited about what they saw. So, I mean, I think there could be opportunities there, but essentially the elementary schools, it's up to the communities, the towns, to determine what they would want to do with that space. But we would very much help and partner with that.
The next question, I'm really not sure we'll have an answer to this, however, is what is the projected tax increase?
So if you remember we had it's actually on our website. If you go to our webpage and you click on the, I don't know which tab, I believe the tab is called the Capital Planning Committee. Tara, it looks like you might be looking, but there was a slide deck that we used that had the mill rate projected. And I think that PowerPoint, we left that PowerPoint there for the community to see. And Tara, I think it's on that it's a slide in that slide deck. Erin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just want to, well, tax, the question is tax increase. I mean, that would go back to a town decision, correct? Or am I wrong? I'm thinking that this would be a capital project with set payments,
Right.
projected payments, I should say, that actually wouldn't even start until 2 years after the project's complete, if I'm correct. So if we're looking at I'm going to be optimistic here, a 5-year building project. We're looking at 7 years until we're actually making payments on this. So with that being said, I will point out that we have 2 years left in our middle school payments that are paid out voted on in each year. They're part of the payment to the school, at each town meeting. We have 2 years or 3 years left on the middle school. 2.
Yeah, there's 2.
So we're going to have a little break before, we get back. But I don't know if Tara found the page that we were looking for. I don't want to say. Okay.
It is on, if you go to our website, it's on the homepage at the bottom, BMRSD capital planning materials. Oh, we're going there. The subcommittee presentation, the top one.
Yeah.
And I think it's like the second to last slide in this. Showed an example based on the numbers we were working on at that time.
And I think it's important to note, Tara, you said something really important, and it's an example. So I know when we did that, we worked with our Unibank rep to help us kind of determine what that could look like. But Erin, to your point, like we don't know 100%. And part of what we can do in this phase is get an expert on the financing side of this to actually come out and do something like we're doing now, and do like a kind of a public Q&A and do an overview of that. But I know there was a mill rate calculation that was done based on.
Yeah, it was project impact per 100,000 of assessed value at current mill rate. Blackstone was about $164 annually, and Millville was coming in at about $181 annually.
And those numbers were based on the 6 through 12, 159,000 square foot project. And I only mention that because, right, that was a project we had to submit. So that scenario was run with that. But if the feasibility study shows actually we'd be better served with an 8 through 12, that square footage actually decreases, right? Or a 7 through 12, that square footage decreases and that cost comes down. So we did it on, and I think Erin, I think you said it was that, kind of most significant scenario, worst scenario kind of thing, most expensive scenario. But it may not shake out that way.
And those
Good
are
question,
actual,
though. Yeah.
Those are all the questions we had. I do know the comment that, I'm sure we have documentation that, talks about the fact that the high school, has some limited accessibility for ADA compliance. And I know Scott mentioned that as well.
We have a full book from DRA pointing
We have
out
all of that. We
our
also have the
deficits.
asbestos reports as well in the updates that we have to do every year on that.
But that's all the questions that came through.
Anything else, Tara, Erin, Scott, Jill?
Reiterate, Jason, you said it a few minutes ago, share this with your neighbors, friends, family in town, in our Blackstone-Millville towns. Stress the need, or understand. I know it's still money in the end. The tax question is a perfect example that it is going to cost us some money, but in the end, we get a lot more if we do it this way than if we just have to make these repairs, which we do. We have to make these repairs regardless. So let's get a whole new building.
Yeah. This is going to be an exciting journey, and it is just the beginning. But we're in it to win it.
Please get involved.
Yeah.
Right. And so we'll continue to schedule these types of sessions, and we'll get moving on the next steps that we outlined on the slide, the last slide. But thanks so much those that were able to tune in. We'll be talking about this, I'm sure, Erin and all the school committee meetings, just giving updates. We'll be forming that building committee. We're going to get people into the high school, people into new schools. So be on the lookout for that information. And there'll be lots more to come. Don't be shy. You have questions, please email any one of us and come right to the source to get answers that you are seeking, because we're very invested in giving the kids what they deserve. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.